Okay, everybody's here and I think ready to get started. I don't know about this thing. Okay, welcome to day 2 of our From Youth at Risk to Kids at Hope Mini-Masters, a positive youth development symposium. When we envisioned this conference, we wanted to use it as a means of bridging the gap between the Roundtable's mission and our Kids at Hope creed, that all children are capable of success, no exceptions, and the reality that many of our children are having challenges succeeding. So the purpose of these 2 days was to take a good look at why that is and what we as adults need to do to ensure that children can succeed in our community. So I really wanted to do that around 2 issues that have come up a lot over the last 3 years that I've been at the Roundtable. The first, and we addressed it on day 1, was reducing racial and ethnic disparities, particularly in juvenile justice and health. And today we're going to be talking about the impact of trauma on our children. So we had an informative day yesterday looking at strategies around reducing disparities, and both of our speakers yesterday, I think, touched a little bit on this issue of trauma and adverse child experiences. So I wanted to take some time this morning to tie that for you to the work that we've been doing at the Roundtable, and also to give our guest speakers a little bit of a context of who we are in St. Lucie County and what our young people are facing. As part of my job at the Roundtable, when I first came on in 2014, my board tasked me with doing an assessment and talking to residents, particularly in North Fort Pierce, about their experiences living in a community that was struggling with crime. So we did a number of things during this assessment, and one of my colleagues, Danny Dreisenter, was like my partner in that, and we really tackled a lot of things. So we looked at police reports, we looked at statistics, we talked to more than 1,200 residents, and several people in this room were a part of that process. We did focus groups with about 200 students and probably 50 parents, and then we did almost 1,000 surveys. So I want to talk a little bit about what we found. Statistically, in 2014, the violent crime rate in Fort Pierce was 1,061 incidents per 100,000 residents. And that was compared to a rate in Florida of 466. So in Fort Pierce, it was more than twice the rate in Florida, and 365 nationwide. The homicide rate was 29, compared to 5.8 in Florida and 4.5 nationwide. In September 2014, a national watchdog ranked Fort Pierce 9th on the list of Florida's most dangerous cities. And this ranking was higher than the rankings given to the cities of Miami, Tampa, Tallahassee, and Riviera Beach. And just so you know, Miami Beach was number 1, and Miami, the city, was number 10, right behind Fort Pierce. We also found that there are small pockets called hotspots in North Fort Pierce where the violence was even more staggering. In 2013, a third of the city's violent crime occurred in an area encompassing 10 street blocks. These 10 street blocks had a crime rate that was twice as high as the city as a whole, 6 times higher than the county, 5 times higher than the state, and 6.5 times higher than the national average. 10 street blocks, 10 street blocks. The data in our county also showed that in St. Lucie County, black males were 4 times more likely than whites to be murdered, and many of those victims were children and teens. I'm going to give you some examples, and most of you in here know the stories because you read about them in the paper. In 2014, we had 2 brothers, ages 18 and 20, found shot to death inside their home. Also in 2014, a 16-year-old was killed while hanging out with some friends. December 2014, a 16-year-old was arrested for open firing at a group of children at a birthday party, a 3-year-old's birthday party. In April 2015, we had a 2-year-old who was killed by a stray bullet that was fired into her home while she was sleeping. In May 2015, we had an 18-year-old shot in broad daylight in front of the public library. Many of these shootings remain unsolved, and many of the kids experience trauma as a result, and most of the kids in that community have never received any sort of mental health counseling as a result of their experiences. So let me ask you, what do you think is happening to these kids, especially in that 10 street blocks, What do you think is happening? What are we seeing with them in school? How do you think they are health-wise? Are they going to school, learning to read, doing well on their FSA testing, and participating in STEM? What do you think we're seeing with these kids? Well, I'm going to tell you. So as I said, in 2014, we talked to a number of teens through surveys and focus groups about the effect of this sort of violence in Fort Pierce. We met hundreds of kids, and we heard their stories. We met a 16-year-old who raps. And every time she raps about her brother being murdered. And every time she raps, at every talent show I've seen her, it ends in crying. You know, if she doesn't win, she gets very combative. She wants to fight. And so I asked somebody, well, when did her brother die? I mean, I lost my brother to violence, and it was 15 years ago. When did her brother die? Because this is still so emotionally present for her. I learned that he had been killed 10 years ago when she was in first grade. But the alleged killer lives near her house, around the corner. This is the person the entire community believes shot her brother. And he's never been charged, he's never been prosecuted, and she sees him regularly. And so for her, this trauma that happened 10 years ago as a first grader is still very present. Another teenager I met was persistently depressed, despite lots of great things happening in his life. He had gotten his GED, he had a part-time job. And so I asked him, well, just tell me one good thing that's happening in your life. And he said, well, none of my friends have been killed lately. So, and I know, this isn't the most positive, maybe hopeful way of starting the morning, but I think there's some real work that has to be done as we engage in this effort of understanding the impact of trauma on our kids. When we asked the teens in the focus group about the impact of living in their community, we had them write their thoughts on these poster papers. So this is the things the teens wrote down. They said, a bullet doesn't know if you make A's and B's. We feel like we're living in a dump. If you snitch, they're going to come after you. We wonder who will be next. We feel like black people are targets. We never know if we will make it another day. The violence causes people to stay in their homes. We are learning to be isolated when we shouldn't have to be isolated, and everyone is living in fear. We also talked to some school staff to hear their stories about what they were seeing when a lot of these kids got to school. One principal told us about a student coming to school with a gash on his head. And this is a principal in an elementary school, so K through 5. When she asked him what happened, he said, I had to help my mother fight last night. Another child laughingly told his peers that he saw his father pull a gun on his mother. And I want to be clear, it's not just black kids in our community that are dealing with trauma and adversity. Over President's Day weekend, we worked with 50 kids in our youth leadership group. And these kids are from every public high school, and they're also from our alternative schools. We had some of the kids that are involved in the DJJ probation system. We also had one young man, well, several of them are in dual enrollment, and one young man recently got into Yale. So it's a very diverse group of young people. And as a matter of fact, again, their photo voice exhibit is in the hallway where they took pictures to communicate to all of you about the challenges that they see in our community. One of the things we did with the kids was something called the cultural competence circle. So we had them get in a big circle because they were so different and were from so many different places. And we wanted them to see that we have more in common than we have differences. So they make this big circle, and the facilitator calls out, walk into the middle of the circle if you like the color blue. So everybody who likes the color blue walks into the middle of the circle. They get to look at each other and see, hey, we come from different parts of the county, but we all like the color blue. Okay, we have that in common. Walk into the middle of the circle if you're in high school. Again, all the kids go in, we have this in common, we're in high school. But the questions soon got very deep. The facilitator said, walk into the middle of the circle if you've ever been bullied. Most of the kids walked into the middle of the circle. Walk into the middle of the circle if a member of your family has a substance abuse addiction. Walk into the middle of the circle if you've ever lost someone you love to violence. Walk into the middle of the circle if you've ever dealt with divorce. And then the facilitator turned it over to the young people to call out the questions. One of the first questions, walk into the middle of the circle if you've ever dealt with depression, anxiety, or had a suicidal thought. Almost every one of those kids walked into the middle of the circle. Walk into the middle of the circle if your parents are separated. The next question, a white young man said, walk into the middle of the circle if you have absolutely no contact with one of your parents. Kids of every race, every school, every grade level, academic success, walked into the middle of that circle. A young lady said, walk into the middle of the circle if you've ever been physically abused. Kids walked into that circle. Walk into the middle of the circle if you've ever been homeless. When I tell you, it changed the dynamic of that conference, because when the kids got back into the room, they understood that they are experiencing the same types of trauma behind closed doors. We asked them, what did you learn? An African-American young man said, I thought that, parents abandoning their kids or dads leaving their kids was a black thing. But I learned today that it's something we all face. So today we're going to look at the impact of that level of adversity on our young people. We're going to look at some ways to solve the challenges that they have. And with that, I'm really, really excited to introduce our first speaker of the day, Mr. David Wallace, who comes to us from LaSalle Residential School in Albany, New York. He's currently the Director of Clinical Services at LaSalle, which is a provider of residential and outpatient treatment services to youth and families with complex mental illness, sexual abuse, and substance abuse treatment needs. He's been on their staff since 2004 and is licensed as a clinical social worker in the state of New York. He is currently the Associate Executive Director for Program Development. He has nearly 20 years of experience in child welfare, juvenile justice, and private practice. And he's developed a specialization in the treatment of juvenile sexual aggression and trauma. And so with that, I'm going to call David to the podium. And I thank you all for your attendance, and I look forward to hearing him share.
Good morning, everyone. How you doing? Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I have a hard time standing behind podiums. I do a lot of public speaking, but I'm a bit of a caged tiger when I do it. But I'll do my best to stay back here because I understand they're videotaping, and I'm worried if I take this microphone out, I'll never get it back into the clip. So Shaniek introduced me. I just want to share with you a little bit my professional background and my experience, and kind of just some quick thoughts about being here this morning. I am, as Shaniek shared with you, I'm a social worker. I'm a clinician by training, which means I can talk. I talk for a living. And in addition to that, I do a lot of presentations. I've got one of the best jobs in the world. I get to travel around the country, in fact, through the United States and Canada. I've done some consultation for the United Kingdom. And I talk to folks just like yourselves around the country about trauma and how to use the emerging neuroscience and what we're understanding about how trauma impacts the brain, the body, emotions, and physical well-being, and how to work across sectors and across disciplines. As a social worker, I was trained to look at an entire child in an entire family, in an entire community, and I think the conversation of ACEs is not really new. I am looking to kill this remote control this morning, so we'll see if it gets through my presentation in one piece. The science of ACEs, for those of you in human service, will not be earth-shattering. It will be validating. I gave a presentation in Chicago about a year or two ago, and someone in the audience about halfway through the presentation said, "Isn't this just old wine in a new bottle?" And in some respect it is. And so if you've been in the human service field for more than 5 or 10 minutes, you will hear a lot of truths that you've come to learn quickly and in a hard way. I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit. And I'll try not to drop this again. But I also want to, I just want to express my deep sense of honor to be in the same room with Antoine Fisher. I just met Mr. Fisher for the first time this morning. I have been using his story, his movie, his book, his message for the last 10 or 15 years of my professional and personal life. I do not have a conversation with a single group of professionals, children, families, providers, interested parties. I can't talk about trauma without talking about his experience in his life and his message of healing and the power of relationship and resilience. And so I am deeply, deeply honored and thankful to be here this morning and to have met one of my all-time heroes. This is like meeting one of the Beatles, as far as I'm concerned. So as evidenced by me dropping this twice, as much public speaking as I do, I'm a little nervous this morning because I'm sandwiched between what I heard was a very good day yesterday, a great night last night, and I'm the lead act for Rick and Antoine, and I understand they're rock stars. So I'll do my best not to drop this and to get through this in one piece. Okay, so just kind of we're going to dive into some science here, and I want to talk to you about the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey. Just a quick show of hands. How many of you have heard of the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey? Okay, that looks to be about a quarter, about a third of the room.